right, well, let's get into this. So thanks for joining us for another episode of Triple Play. And as always, don't forget to
like and subscribe.
And don't forget to support those that support us. And you could be one of those people, by the way. We're still looking for more sponsors. And so if you're somebody who's interested in helping us grow, we're now over 15,000 subscribers and growing. We're heading towards 20 pretty quickly right now. So that's all praise to God, and we're thankful. But if you're somebody who wants to help support us, let us know. We're glad to plug you in as much as possible. There's going to be a lot of cool things coming down the pipe. We're doing so. Just keep your eyes open. From the website and everything else. We got apps coming. We got coffee coming. Hopefully some supplements coming. We're going to keep cranking this thing up 100%. So all that said, don't forget to support Resource One and Andy McCollum and his team at 636-458-1798 or CS Design and Chris at 573-436-3717. And we appreciate those guys. All that said, this episode is a little different. We're not going to have a guest in studio. I happened to go to this breakfast. So there's a new group that's kind of come around, replacing the CNBC group around here in the St. Louis area, which was like a men's Bible study.
What's the acronym CNBC stand for?
Christian Men's CMB, I think was.
Oh, it's okay if you don't know.
Christian Men's.
I was just wondering.
Yeah, they did that. They used to host the downtown mayor's prayer breakfast and all that.
Okay.
And the founders of that have kind of, I don't know if they've all passed away or whatnot, but I know they were getting up there in age. If not, they certainly got to be close. And so they've kind of turned it into something new. There's a new group that it's kind of taken over that spot. It's called Legacy Builders. They do a breakfast twice a year. And then they encourage Paul Timothy type discipleship. So there's a 2-year program you can do. I was invited to a breakfast, and at this breakfast was a really cool baseball player named R.A.Dickey. Now, you had a cool story about R.A. You faced him a little bit, right?
I did, yeah. I think I struck out on 3. I think he threw 3 of the fastest knuckleballs that year against me in 1 at bat.
Wow. How'd that feel?
Like, not great. I wasn't even.
Were you swinging up here and the ball was down there?
Just about. Yeah.
It's kind of like that Wayno when he really gets that 12-6 thing. That's just so those knuckleballs are leading.
That was so that was basically my job for a while. Was I faced guys like that? Like you have a right-handed starter every day in left field, and then R.A.Dickey comes in town during his MVP season and throwing up wiffle balls, and he says, "I'm a little tight, Scott. Can you play tomorrow?" So then I get to face guys like R.A.Dickey. So yeah.
So it's fun.
Not fun, but fun. Yeah.
Well, that being said, this testimony is great. You're going to enjoy this clip. Enjoy it. The visual feed isn't great. I wasn't even planning on it, so I literally wasn't sure what to expect. So I recorded it on my cell phone. But audio-wise, you're going to enjoy it. I apologize for any shaking or anything like that because I literally just.
So if you're watching, just close your eyes.
Yeah, or you can watch a little bit. It's not terrible. I was kind of doing one of these things, so I was trying to keep it as stable as I could at times, but holding it for an hour.
Where were these things?
I didn't have them. I was at the breakfast. I wasn't even planning on it. If I'd known, I could have got a stand or something, or even brought like our portable camera with us.
Next time.
So next time. Yep.
All right.
Maybe we'll get them on the show sometime so you can talk about those. That'd be fun.
I would love that. I would love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that said, enjoy this episode.
Thanks for having me here today. Mike, special thanks to you for inviting me to share some time with you guys. But he did say something about the Silent Award and academic culture, and that's all great. But he didn't mention that there's been 23,000 Major League Baseball players that have come through the big leagues, and my name's at the top of the list for the most home runs given up in a single game as well. So I own that one too. Also, the record for the most wild pitches in an inning. On that one too. Gave up Derek Jeter's last home run as a major leaguer. And I've given up a home run to 2 different pitchers in my 21-year big league career. And one of them was Adam Wainwright. So you can appreciate that, I'm sure. In all seriousness, I was telling Mike, I only do 4 of these a year, and that's on purpose. And I'm sharing that with you not to tell you any special thing or I'm any special person. You know, I think everybody in here would agree, and something important for us all to recognize is that there's not a soul in here that is a self-made man or woman. We are all products of people who have loved us well and have poured into us. And so that is why I'm here. It's not because I'm a special person or I'll do something differently. My only authority to be up here talking to you is that I've been given a story by God. And I can't help but share it because of what it's meant to me. And part of my journey that I'm going to take you on today over the next 25 to 35 minutes is a very hard journey. It's also an incredible journey, but there are parts of it that are very painful and emotional for me. So forgive me if I get emotional up here, because every time that I share it, it becomes new again for me, which is one of the reasons that I only do 4 of these a year. And with a group like this, I felt that God has convicted me and put it on my heart to be very transparent and vulnerable with you guys today. And so I'm going to trust that with you men today. And hopefully along the way you will glean something from what God has done in my life that you can apply to your own and to your children and to the relationships that you guys are a part of and are invested in, whether it's in the community of legacy builders or beyond. So again, this is a divine appointment. There is no way that we will ever all be here together again. And so because of that, it's a really special and neat opportunity for all of us. And God's got something for me in it, and I know He's got something for you in it. So again, thank you for having me. And I think the place that I want to start is where most good books or good stories start. It's at the beginning. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I was born and raised there. And live there presently. A little bit about my family before we get started. So I'm married to a wonderful woman named Ann, and we've been married for 25 years, unbelievably. And I have 4 kids. I have 2 girls at the top that are 21 and 20, and I have two boys at the bottom that are 16 and 12. My girls go to, I've kept them in the SEC. So they're at UT in Auburn. My boys are a freshman and 5th grader at a small Christian school in Nashville called Christ Presbyterian Academy. And if you guys have been keeping up with the news with the school shooting at Covenant School, that is a school that's kind of our sibling school, which is right down the road. And so we've been really dealing with a lot of that stuff in our own community. But God is good. He has worked through a lot of trauma and tragedy in the lives of a lot of people that have been affected by that tragedy in a way that has been transforming and miraculous. So please know that if you have been praying for our community, I want to say thank you because God has shown up in a huge way in our community. I live on a farm, like he said. We've got 3 horses, a donkey, 25 chickens. You might read it in the thing. We've got 2 bunnies, 2 dogs, and a pig named Meatball, R.I.P. Rest in peace, Meatball. When he sent out that, or probably put that brochure to the printer, Meatball was alive and well, but since poor Meatball has gone down. And you'll be happy to know that we did not eat Meatball. We did not eat Meatball. We buried Meatball just like a family pet, and everybody got good closure from it. She was a good pet. So that's my life, and I'm retired from baseball now. But I was sharing with someone else earlier. I'm not retired in the sense that you go play golf every day and you go on vacations. I'm fully invested in my kids and my farm. I have a farm. It's a 40-acre farm. We grow some of our own food, and so that keeps me really, really busy. As well as some non-for-profit stuff that I do in our own community around my own personal story, which we will get to here shortly. So when I was younger and growing up, I would say that my parents were low to middle income. We lived in a very small neighborhood in an 850 square foot home. And they were trying to make it the best they could. My mother had me when she was 18, so that's tough. And I think they for sure got married because my mom got pregnant with me, and that's tough as well. And so as they grew up, and as I was growing up, I could tell that there were problems even from a young age with the relationship that they had. They ended up getting divorced when I was 8 years old, and that's where I want to start my story. 1982, I was 8 years old, and it was the worst year of my life, I think, like in retrospect. I've had some good ones and I've had some bad ones, like the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, and praise be the name of the Lord, but 1982 was a tough one. My parents got divorced when I was 8, and it was also probably the defining moment in my childhood where I was sexually abused by both a babysitter and a stranger in the same year. And so, as you might imagine, that is an incredibly traumatic event. And I want to take you through a little bit about that, just for the sake of empathy, if nothing else. And people in here, there's an organization out there that I've been a part of called 1 in 6. And if you can believe it, that 1 in 6 of all men have in some way been sexually abused as a child or older, which is incredible to think about. So maybe you can relate to my story through your own story, but if nothing else, it'll give you some empathy. So when that happened in 1982, I had no place for that. As an 8-year-old boy, you don't know what sex is, you don't know what a penis is, you don't know what anything is, really. And yet, all of a sudden, my world changed in a moment, and I was forced to come to grips with what had happened. And what happens when people go through that kind of trauma is they start developing mechanisms in their world to protect themselves from the pain of what that trauma represented. And so for me, my growth as a human being was really stunted when I was 8 years old. And you guys will see how that manifests as I tell my story. But in that moment, in that summer of 82, I started my toxic process of how to hide and medicate from the pain of what had happened. And so I built up the skills of being able to tell half-truths, to keep people at arm's distance, to project something that I wanted people to see, but really wasn't me. And it was about that time that I fell in love with sports as well. It was kind of a sanctuary for me. I was a pretty good athlete even as a young guy. And as I went through my younger years, from 8 to my teenage years, I was invited to play on a lot of teams that were fun. But all the while, I had this trauma that was constantly playing in the background that I didn't want anybody to know about. I was ashamed. I felt less than human. I didn't know how to process it out. And I was broken through and through. And so part of what I want to try to work through with you guys today in the next 25 minutes is, how, and we'll get a chance to discuss this maybe at the end as a group at our tables, but how do we go through life and hold what is both beautiful about the world and broken about the world? How do we hold those two things and take steps forward? How do you reconcile the covenant shooting and asylum, or a wonderful marriage, or your baby being born and the death of your dad, or whatever it may be? How do you do that? And part of my journey as a man, and listen guys, I am still in process. Like, I have not arrived. I don't have all the answers. I'm simply telling you today that I've worked very hard at trying to figure out the answer to that question. Because in that question is peace and contentment and joy and love and the experience of being able to hold our stories deeply and then give them away. Because that is eventually what I discovered my purpose to be, is how do I come to grips with a story that is both horrendous and incredible, and get to the place where through a biblical worldview, I can give that away because of my relationship with Jesus Christ. And now it's taken me a long time, and I'm still in process, man, like I said. But from 8 to 12, I had started to develop these skills that were really, really good at pretending and hiding, because I was bound by shame from a story that I felt like I was an animal when that stuff was occurring to me. And I felt also like I had something to do with it, that it was partially my fault. And so the genesis of my story starts there for me. Like I have a really hard time remembering anything before age 8 because of that moment. Like I really can't remember, but I have an incredible memory. It's not an eidetic memory, but it's a really, really good memory. Like I can recall for you an at-bat with a pitch sequence to Miguel Cabrera from 2008. Like I can tell you just about every guy that I've faced and how I pitched him. And so that is both a blessing and a curse to me, but I can't remember much before age 8 because of that. And like I said, my growth was stunted, and I was coming up with all these ways to keep people at arm's distance. I did not grow up in the church. I did not know Christ early on in my life. And I was a product of a divorced family. My mother was an alcoholic and had to go to rehab a couple different times. So I was what they call a latchkey kid. I would come home from school, there would be a key under the mat, and I let myself in and out. And this was, as an 11, 12-year-old boy going to public school in Nashville, Tennessee. My dad was on the other side of town. My mom was in and out of rehab, and so I was on my own living with my grandparents and friends and anybody who would kind of take me in for a long time as part of my existence at that time. And so I learned how to take care of myself in a way that didn't have much to do with nurturing and loving and caring, and I just wanted to survive. And so a lot of our journeys as men is this journey from how do I learn how to graduate from being a survivor and coming to understand that God's got something more in becoming a craftsman with the story that God's given us, to becoming an artist and being able to paint a picture for people about what Jesus can do in your life when you start to understand the value of a personal and intimate relationship with Him. And so as I was moving through my life, I did not understand any of those things. So I was stuck in survival mode. And survival mode for me meant, as I got into high school at an all-boys school called Montgomeryville Academy in Nashville, Tennessee, I kept a sleeping bag in the back of my car because I didn't want to go home. And I would find myself flipping through the one ads. You guys remember when there was actual papers, you didn't have to read on the internet. But I would go to the library of our school, and you remember, I don't know if you've ever had the visual of those long kind of rides where the paper would be inside and you'd be flipping through the pages, and I'd get to the one ads and I would try to find houses that were for rent so that I could go to that address, see if anybody was in the house, break in and sleep there before school the next morning. So that was kind of what I did. And I thought, there's nothing wrong with that, I'm just surviving. Right? Like I had no concept of what was normal, what was healthy. And it all started when I was 8. And I kept that secret for a long, long time. And it ate away my soul. And it destroyed a lot of what could have been a different path. But God saw fit to do something different in my life. And so when I was 13 years old, I was in a public school and I was playing baseball in a backfield somewhere in a neighborhood, and there was somebody from that private school that noticed that I was a pretty good athlete. And so in Nashville, Tennessee, we don't call it recruiting athletes in the private school sector, but people recognize when somebody's got a gift and they want that gift to be at their school. And the next thing you know, I was scholarshiped over to NBA. That's a nice way to say it, right? So at NBA, which is an all-boys school, it's been around for about 125 years. It's an incredible place. I I got to go to 7th grade there as a 13-year-old. And my first exposure to Christ occurred when I was 13. And I want to share with you what that was like for me. So, like I said, from 8 to 13, for those 5 years, I didn't really understand how to go about my life in a way that brought joy or peace or contentment. I got to NBA. I was kind of the outcast because I came from the other side of town. We didn't have money. I was living with my grandmother at the time. I was in the most affluent community. It's called Belmead, Tennessee, Belmead, and that was where NBA was. And I was around, people that I did not understand. And I was in a culture that I did not understand. And it only made me feel more ashamed because of what I had already been through. I had the toxicity of, that secret and keeping that secret, but I also had this new thing that I didn't feel like I could live up to what was going on around me. I didn't feel worthy. And that's what, when you're sexually abused like that, it steals any self-worth that you may have innate in you. We're all created in God's image. It steals that from you, and it was stolen from me in that moment. So any self-worth that I had was completely wrapped up in how I performed as an athlete. It didn't have to do with relationship. It didn't have to do with, being a child of the living God. I didn't know anything about that. So when I was 13, I got invited. This is an incredible story. I got invited by a guy named Bo Bartholomew, like the disciple Bartholomew. And he was an 8th grader. I was on the football team, and I think he noticed that I didn't have many friends and was kind of isolated, and he felt some compassion for me. And he came up and invited me to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes event at Montgomeryville Academy. And I had watched Bo. He was an upperclassman to me because he was an 8th grader, I was a 7th grader, and I noticed that he kind of operated differently and he treated people differently, and I saw something different in him. I didn't know what it was. Maybe he was a trickster, or maybe, wanted something from me, or maybe he wanted to abuse me. I don't know. That's where my mind would go because of my past. But there was something in him that I really respected. And so when he invited me to an FCA, I said, sure, I'll go. I'll go. And so that was my first exposure to who Jesus Christ was. And that was when I was 13. And I started going weekly to these meetings on Thursday night in the Roberts Room of NBA, and started to hear people's testimony and started to understand about who Christ was and what he could provide. And it was appealing to me. I wanted that. Because let me tell you, I wanted relief. You guys ever want relief from things? I wanted relief. I wanted relief from the pain of that. I wanted relief from trying so hard for people not to see that or find out about that. I wanted relief in general of having to lie or having to pretend. I wanted relief. I wanted relief. And so after walking with Bo and through FCA for about 6-7 months, I got down on my knees and I asked Christ to be Lord and Savior of my life. And that was when I was 13 years old. Now, that event occurred and I felt a real change in me and started to, go to church with him, spend the night at his house. And one afternoon, he invited me to his house for the first time ever. And I said, sure, I'll go to your house. I started to trust him and enjoy being around him. And, we were teammates, so I said, sure. So we went into his house and I walked around the corner, and on the couch, I saw this bushy blonde hair that looked like a lion's mane. And I'm thinking, okay, what's that? And then she turned around and it was his sister. And man, was I smitten like that. Like she was gorgeous to me. And I knew right then that I wanted to get to know her. And I may use Bo to get to know her somehow. And if you fast forward a lot of years, she is now my wife, so it worked, right? But I met her in my 7th grade year, right? Yeah. So we met in seventh grade and became friends, and you know, eventually, you know, I tricked her into marrying me. That's another story. We'll talk about that too here in a second. But I saw her. I went home with him and started to become friends with him, and you know, she kept me coming back for sure, just for the hope of getting to see her or be around her. But it also gave me a great relationship with Bo. And so we became friends. But at that time, when I accepted Christ, there was a change in my heart. And I did feel relief. Right? Matthew 11, it says, "Come to me, all you who are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." But there's another part to that I always gloss over. And this is the part for you. This is the part for me now. The next part of that verse, which we forget, is it says, "Take up my yoke and learn from me." So I stopped at the relief. I stopped at the relief when I was 13. Jeremiah 9:23 is probably my favorite verse. Let not the wise man boast of his wisdom, or the strong man boast of his strength, or the rich man boast of his riches, but let he who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me. Now that day, as a 13-year-old, I knew him. I got him. Like, I knew that he loved me, and I did feel relief. I did feel relief. But as far as the cultivation of a relationship and becoming a disciple and trying to live out my faith, I don't know if I was so interested in that part at that moment. Right? I was interested in the relief. I needed somebody that I could turn to. I needed relief from pain. And some of us in the room, we may be in that spot, right? We may need relief from pain. But that is just the beginning. And I did not know that as a 13-year-old. I was not discipled, which is why I thank God. I told you I do 4 of these a year, because that's all I can handle emotionally. And also I know that if I only choose 4 out of however many that I have the opportunity to do, that God has a really divine thing for people here and for me. And so I wanted the discipleship, but didn't know it. I craved the cultivation of a relationship with a living God, but I did not know it. I was simply all about surviving in that moment because my growth had been stunted and I needed relief. And so I got that relief, but I did not get the cultivation. So as I started to grow in my sports and started to become really good, a little bit about what was happening on the sideline of sports at that time. I was a 7th grader. As I became an 8th grader, I played on the varsity baseball team. I was pretty good, so they wanted me to play as an 8th grader, and that was great. And eventually I was drafted out of high school in the 10th round of the June amateur draft by the Detroit Tigers out of high school. I was a hard thrower at the time. So I threw probably in high school, I probably threw low 90s for 1993. That was pretty fast. Now everybody throws 100. So when you turn on the TV, everybody's throwing 100 miles an hour. That is not always the way. Either the guns are juiced up or they need some kind of steroids. Because it's amazing to me how many people are throwing 100 miles an hour now. When I was in the major leagues, even just as a side note, I remember my Cy Young year in 2012, there were 4 guys that threw 100 miles an hour, 4. And now there's like 44. And that's not hyperbole, that's like for real. Like, they may not know where it's going, so watch out. But they throw 100. So I was drafted as a hard thrower, a conventional pitcher. So my arsenal of pitches as a pitcher, I was a fastball, I had a really good curveball, I had a changeup, and I threw a knuckleball, but just for fun. My grandfather taught it to me when I was real young, and since we have a couple of minutes here, I want to give you a tutorial about what a knuckleball is, so you can kind of understand that. If you've never heard of a knuckleball, I want to give you a brief tutorial. If you know what it is, maybe this will help you have a deeper love for the pitch, which, by the way, is extinct in the major leagues now. And it's always been a pitch that only a couple of guys have thrown throughout their careers. However, when I was playing, it was Tim Wakefield and myself for a number of years. But my grandfather taught it to me about, imagine the baseball. There's a horseshoe made by the seams on the back. Does anybody here have a baseball that they brought for me to sell? Anybody? Sometimes they do. Yes, bring it up to me real quick. If somebody's got, yeah, there you are. Okay, this will be fun. I'll let you catch it here.
I'll get 90 miles an hour so you can catch it.
Okay, so I want to just give you a brief tutorial about what a knuckleball is. So imagine every pitch that you see on TV, Wainwright, and like y'all got two, the Cardinals, I say y'all, the Cardinals have two guys that throw up, 100 or better. But every ball that you see on national TV that is thrown with spin on it to impart spin. So for instance, if I want to throw a four-seam fastball, I want to grip it across this horseshoe, and I want to spin it as tightly as I can, throw it as hard as I can so that the ball stays true to my target and it gets there at 100 miles an hour, hopefully. If I want to throw a curveball, I want to try to put overspin on it, or I want to yank down the front of the horseshoe. I want that horseshoe to catch and spin so that it's got top spin, and the guy thinks it's a fastball, but it's not, and he swings and he misses. If I want to throw a changeup, I grip it with a circle and I throw it so that it spins and it loses some rotation, so it fades away at less speed. Thus the name changeup, right? Changeup from a fastball. Every ball that you see thrown on national TV is meant to impart spin on the baseball. Okay? So a knuckleball is antithetical to that. A knuckleball, I'm trying to reduce spin. Okay? And so when my grandfather was teaching me the pitch, he taught me the very first thing about the pitch, and that's the grip. Are there any Yankees fans in here? Anybody? Thank God. I was going to say, raise your hand. I was going to say, get out. Get out. Like the Mets, most of my career, when I think about my career, I think, most of my great years were with the Mets. And so we had this horrible feud with the Yankees I was going to tell you, and I can't teach you the secret or even let you see it. But since there are no Yankees fans in here, we're going to go. Okay, so if this is the horseshoe of the baseball, you take your fingernails. Now, the knuckleball is a knuckleball not because you throw it with the knuckles. You don't throw it with the knuckles. You throw it with your fingernails. And the reason it's called a knuckleball is that if that's the target down this runway here, and I'm throwing the baseball, you see my knuckles sticking up. But I throw it with my fingernails. And every great knuckleballer that's ever lived, from Eddie Siccotti to Hoyt Wilhelm to Joe Negro to Phil Negro to myself to Charlie Huff, all of them is thrown with the fingernails. Now some guys have a 3-finger grip, some guys have a 2-finger grip, but the most important thing is you need to get good fingernails. So do your wives ever buy a horse and mane to make your hair and your fingernails real strong? I was on that stuff all the time. Like I was a frequent visitor to the Korean nail salons in New York all the time just to try to keep my nails the right way. But anyway, I would dig my nails in behind that horseshoe, and I would try to keep my wrist as stiff as possible. And as I released the ball, it was much more of a letting go. Now that's a great metaphor, right? And I don't think it was an accident that God introduced me to this pitch, because of all the great metaphors that come with throwing it. Like Bob Uecker, I think, said it best as far as catching it. He said the best way to catch it on the ball is to wait till it stops rolling and just pick it up. Because of how much it's moving and how people miss it and whatnot. Well, it's a great metaphor for my Christian walk as well, right? Like it's up and down, it's sideways, but there is a target and you can throw a strike with it. And if you do throw a strike with it consistently, it can be an incredible weapon in the major leagues. So my grandfather's introduced me to it. And so that's what I threw those 4 pitches as a high school senior. Well, I decided to go to the University of Tennessee instead. And as I did that, I was still what you would call a Christian, of course, because I had come to know Christ and thank God for His grace, but I had never told a soul about my abuse. And that would go on for some time. When I got to my freshman year at the University of Tennessee, I was still playing very well as an athlete. I decided I was a 3-sport athlete in high school and wanted to play football. That was my first thought. But Tennessee was the only place that I could play football and baseball. That was the only place that they offered me to do that. However, when I got there, there was a young man, you guys may know the name, his name was Peyton Manning, and he was a little bit better than I was, but just by that much. So I decided, listen, I'm just gonna concentrate on baseball. There was also another guy named Todd Hall, who was pretty good too, he did both as well. All that to say is I settled on baseball because I felt like I had a future there, and so that's what I did. And so my freshman year, I got involved with the on-campus FCA and Champions for Christ, little sit-outs on campus, and try to learn what I could, but I still was pretending. You know, I wasn't interested in real deep relationship with other men because I was scared to death that I would suffer the same trauma I did in 1982. And so I built all these mechanisms up, like I said, on how to keep people at arm's length. I didn't trust another man, whether it was a peer or a coach or an elder, because I felt like at some point they were going to take something from me that I did not want to give. And so that was hard. And at this time, my wife and I started dating, and my parents got divorced when I was 8, and so I never had modeled for me what a healthy relationship looked like in the home either. And so at the same time, you know, she doesn't know about my abuse. I've never shared with her about my trauma and all the things that I felt made me wicked and gross and ugly and dirty and less than human, because I didn't want her to walk away. And that was my fear all the time. The burden and the thing that I wanted relief from, it was constantly in the background. Now, I didn't live in that place all the time like I did before I knew Christ, and I would always eventually get to the point where I could just say, enough, Lord, please just, you know, give me some hope, give me some relief. And I did feel that relief. And I prayed and came up with different kinds of healthy mechanisms to deal with that trauma, but I never really cultivated the relationship. I was still stuck. And so as I went through college, I was eventually drafted by the Texas Rangers in the first round of the June amateur draft. So I went out of high school as a 10th rounder. I went to UT and grew my skills, cultivated my craft, and was drafted as the 18th pick overall in the nation as a junior out of UT. So I decided to go. Now, when I got drafted, and some of you may know this story, but most of you probably don't, every first rounder has to undergo a pretty comprehensive physical. And so I went down to from UT, or actually we were playing the 96 Olympics where we won the bronze medal. And so I finished my Olympic season in Atlanta and then went home, had agreed in principle to a contract worth close to $1 million as a signing bonus in 1996. And was going to go down and sign my contract and get on with my career. And when I went down there, I went through a physical, just like every first rounder has to do. And I'll never forget, the last test that I ever took was called the valgus stress test. And the valgus stress test is what they do to all pitchers, where you put your elbow, where you put your arm in this mechanism, it applies a little bit of pressure from the back, and then they take a snapshot via an x-ray at what your joint looks like. And they did that to me, and I didn't think anything of it. I played quarterback in high school and never missed a start, never had pain. And I got to the field, I went from the doctor's office to the field to throw out the first pitch. Going to meet Nolan Ryan, my childhood hero, who was affiliated with the Texas Rangers at the time, and start my professional career. Well, from the time that I went from the doctor's office to the general manager's office, the doctor had called and said to the GM in private, I think something's wrong with R.A. And I didn't know that, so I got to the place. My agent went in to meet with the GM. I stood out on the deck in Arlington. If you've ever been to Texas, there's a deck that overlooks the field. They were taking batting practice, and I was just visualizing wearing those red shoes and, you know, pitching in the big leagues and all the things that a little boy dreams about, right? And my agent tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, come in, Doug Melvin wants to talk to you with the Rangers. And I said, okay, great, because I thought he was going to say, hey, congratulations. But the next words out of his mouth were, hey, R.A., we think there might be something wrong with your elbow. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, we don't know for sure. We want to send you to Dr. James Andrews in Alabama and have you take an MRI. So I didn't get to do all the things that I dreamed about. I flew back home. The next day I drove to Alabama with my now wife. the two of us. We got there, went through the MRI, they took the picture. I'll never forget, as long as I live, I walked upstairs after the imaging had been completed, got to the hallway, and I looked down the hallway to where Andrew's office was, and he always had all these interns around him because he was a world-renowned orthopedist at the time, so everybody wanted to be kind of under him. And they all had these open books. They were pointing to books and then pointing to my MRI, and like it was like a teaching moment. And I thought, oh Lord, a teaching moment is not good. So I'm walking back towards James Andrews, and my wife comes around the corner, and she's got tears in her eyes because he had already shared with her what I was about to understand. And it was that I didn't have an ulnar collateral ligament in my right elbow at all. So that's the UCL, Tommy John surgery that all these pictures have. I didn't have the ligament that they were replacing in all these pictures. I just didn't have it. And I thought, well, that's great news. I should get double the money. Because he never got to pay for me to have Tommy John surgery because I don't have a Tommy John ligament. This is great news. They didn't see it that way, I'm afraid. And so I went home, and the next call I got was from the general manager of the Texas Rangers saying, hey, we don't even want to sign you anymore. And so my dream of becoming a Major League Baseball player had evaporated right before my eyes after I hadn't done anything to deserve it in my mind. Right? So you can imagine after, how I told you about the stunted growth as an 8-year-old? Well, I still hadn't grown up, and all that trauma was being brought back to the surface, and I had a lot of anger towards God, and we had some really hard discussions, and I don't know if you're in this room and you're not a believer, know this about God. He can take your anger. He can take your disappointment. He can take your hurt, your confusion. He can take all of that. Like you have the freedom to grapple with God in a lot of incredible and meaningful ways, and on the other side of that is some incredible peace. I was in that place. Like part of me was already trying to figure out how God could let something like that happen with an 8-year-old boy. And now I was trying to figure out, God, how could you take, and like I said, I came from real humble beginnings, so I had already thought about, I can buy my mom this, and I can do that, and I can, I was finally going to have money for the first time in my life, and in a moment, it was evaporated. So fast forward about 11 or 12 days, I'm going into my senior year at UT. Nobody wants me. I'm damaged goods, and all that story is coming back to the surface, and I'm having to replay it over and over again in my mind and heart, and I feel like I'm this big. And I got a call the day before classes started at UT. And the rule back then was if you stepped foot in a classroom on a college campus for your senior year, you would immediately become ineligible and have to wait for the following year's draft. Well, the following year's draft, with that hanging over me, I probably wasn't going to be drafted because of the news of what had happened. And it went nationwide. Nobody had ever heard of it. I had like shows like It's a Strange Universe call me, want to do, doctors call me, want to do case studies. Hey, the way we do this surgery now, we may just take it out of everybody, and so it was really a bizarre time. And the night before I was supposed to go back to UT, I was an English major and had classes lined up. I was going to, go back to the team and see whatever happened would happen. And I got a call at midnight. And the general manager said to me, hey, we'll sign you, but we're going to reduce your signing bonus from $1 million to $75,000. Take it or leave it. And so in that moment, I had a decision to make. And I decided that I was going to take it and try to bet on myself. And after paying for an engagement ring and a Lloyd's of London insurance policy, I had $6,500 left in my bank account and was headed down to spring training in 1997 for my first year with the Texas Rangers. So as you can see, like all this stuff started churning up in me again. And because I had not cultivated a relationship with God, but yet I knew Him, I didn't know how to behave with that stuff. So I was angry. I was angry at my wife all the time. I was upset. Now, from 1997 until 2005, I was a conventional pitcher in the major leagues with the Texas Rangers. Now, when I say major leagues, I mean I was in the minor leagues and then the major leagues, the minor leagues and the major leagues. In a 9-year period, I probably accumulated 3 years, 2.5 years of major league service time, which means that I've spent 7.5 years in the minor leagues bouncing up and down all the time. You're good enough, no you're not. You're good enough, no you're not. You're good enough, no you're not. Right? Like that's how it works. And if you know professional sports, you know it's a what have you done for me lately business. And if you don't perform well, then you're worth nothing. And I already felt like I was worth nothing. And the only thing that I had was sport, was baseball. Like my whole identity was wrapped up in it. It was completely an idol for me. My self-worth, who I was as a human being, my success, that was the only validation that I felt. Now I knew Christ, and ultimately I cared about that because I've been like, I wanted to go to heaven, and also I wanted relief, but I didn't know what it was like to walk and live with him. And so I had all these toxic, manifestations of trying to figure it out on my own through this time. And so I got 2.5 years of major league service time, bouncing up and down. And then there was a climactic moment for me in 2005, where at the time with the Texas Rangers, Buck Showalter was the manager. Oral Hershiser, remember Oral Hershiser? So Oral Hershiser was my pitching coach. They noticed that I had a really good knuckleball. I would play catch with my buddies on the side when I was in the big leagues. Even though I was a conventional pitcher, I'd just mess around with it, and they would see, like I'd throw it to my partner, and he'd put his glove up here and it'd hit him in the leg, right? Like, I mean, it was something that they knew might be a weapon, and they were watching Tim Wakefield come through as a Boston Red Sox and just blow him up every time he came through, like throwing 2 hitters and 4 hitters. And I think Buck Showalter said, I want one of those guys. And he knew I had a good knuckleball. And it was at the point in my career where I had to be very honest about what I could do as a conventional pitcher. And I've been pitching for 9.5 years as a conventional guy, and slowly but surely every spring training, my velocity would drop. I threw mid-90s, like I was 94, 95 in college. The next spring training I was like 93, 92, and it just kept creeping down and down, just through general attrition, just so much use. I think I just ran out of steam, And it finally got to the point where I was throwing 87 miles an hour in the AL West, and I'll never forget throwing a pitch to a guy named Vladimir Guerrero, not junior, who plays now for the Blue Jays, but senior, who played for the Angels at the time. And I threw a great fastball away, and I had been like 86, 88, the whole spring training, wondering where my fastball went. And I threw a ball on the outside corner to Vladimir Guerrero, and I heard a crack in the bat. And I thought, when I let it go, I thought, man, that felt great. I think that's going to be done. I think I'm really hard not to be done. I heard this gigantic crack, sound like an explosion. And it was his barrel hitting the baseball. And before I can even get my glove up, this is not hyperbolic. Like I'm telling you, a lot of times I use exaggeration to make a point. That's what all good storytellers do. But in this case, this is not an exaggeration. I stuck my hand up, and by the time I got it up and got my hand around, the ball was ricocheting off the center field wall. And I thought to myself, I don't think I got it anymore. I think it's, this may be it. And sure enough, I felt that in my spirit. And sure enough, after the game, I got called in the general manager's office. And Buck Showalter and Oral Hershiser were sitting there, and I fully expected them to either release me after 9.5 years of playing professionally and say, go home. I've given up a few runs, one new and great. And they said, hey, R.A., you don't got it anymore, bud. And there's a moral to this for everybody in here. Like, we need people in our lives that can see in us things that we can't see ourselves. You need to be a person in somebody else's life that sees in them what they cannot see for themselves. In this moment, it was the general manager of the team, it was Buck Showalter, it was Oral Hershiser, and they were saying, hey man, you ain't got it anymore, but We do think that you could be a good knuckleball pitcher. We do think that you could throw a knuckleball and have success at the major league level. I didn't. I mean, it was just nothing more than a novelty to me at the time. But in that moment, they gave me a real boost of confidence to see what I could not see. They said, we want to send you down to AAA, and we want you to develop this and see what it might become. We're going to give you the latitude to fail, and you have, this was in probably June of 2005, and hopefully you'll perform well enough and we can call you back up as a knuckleballer full time. Now, to be a good knuckleballer, you have to commit to that pitch 90% of the time. So if I threw 100 pitches in a complete game, 90 of them needed to be knuckleballs. I mean, the beauty of that pitch is that you can know it's coming, and it's going to do 10 different things, even though I throw it the same way every time. That's the beauty of the pitch, right? Like, if I don't know where it's going, the hitter surely doesn't know where it's going, right? And the catcher surely doesn't know where it's going. That's why I have most wild pitches in an inning in the Metrodome, and I gave up 3 runs and they give up a hit. Because nobody could catch it. And I was walking guys and hitting guys. I threw a knuckleball one time to a guy named Prince Wheeler who swung at the pitch and it hit him in the chest. It might have been the best knuckleball I've ever thrown. I might can YouTube it when you go home. But I threw it and he saw it great. It was right down the middle, and that thing just didn't move an inch. I mean, you could read the label. See that thing from baseball? You could read the label that was coming at it, and I saw his eyes get about this big, like he was going to hit it 500 feet. And when he committed it, it just decided to take a left turn. It hit it right in the chest, and as it was swinging, there's strike 3. It was the best thing ever. So anyway, I'm having to go down there and learn this pitch, and that was in 2005. My first outing ever as a professional with this pitch. I gave up 10 runs against the Iowa Cubs in AAA. 10 runs, 8 hits, 6 walks, 4 stolen bases, no strikeouts. And I'm thinking, I don't think this is gonna work, man. Like, I don't know what to do with this. I've never had that bad of an outing ever, even as a conventional. Surely my conventional stuff isn't this bad, right? Like, that's what I'm thinking in my mind. The manager came to get the ball from me and he said, hey, I'll see you in 5 days. Like, keep your head up, see you in 5 days. So slowly but surely, I started to understand a little bit more about the pitch, And they put me in touch with a guy named Charlie Love. And I said at the beginning of this, and it stands true in your life, it will always stand true in your life. You're always, and your kids are going to be the same way. Teach it to them early. We are all the product of people who have loved us well, right? And so am I. And so my mentors in the knuckleballing world, Phil Negro, Charlie Huff, and Tim Wakefield, and I learned under those 3 guys. That was my Jedi council of knuckleballers. And I would call them, they were all on my speed dial, and they poured into me in ways that I did not deserve. I'll never forget playing for the Mariners. And this was a competing team. He was coming through with the Red Sox. I was playing for the Mariners, and he said, hey, R.A., why don't you come and watch my bullpen? I mean, who does that, right? Like, they're trying to beat us, not giving me advice on how to beat them. Right? And that's the fraternity of knuckleball guys. I mean, it's just such a tight-knit fraternity. But anyway, I started to learn more about the pitch, slowly but surely. Now listen, that was 2005. My Cy Young Award didn't happen until 2012. If you do the math, that's 7 years. 7 years of grinding and trying to figure it out. Now, what I'm about to say is probably the most important thing that you'll hear today. This anecdote as an aside to the story. It was 2005. I felt like a failure. I had completed my minor league season as a knuckleballer and got just shell-shocked. Like, I mean, there were balls like laser beams being hit everywhere, and I'm thinking, I just think this might be it. Like, I just felt worthless. Because again, my identity was so wrapped up in who I was as a pitcher. So much so that I had wrecked my marriage. I had become just an absentee dad. I had 2 kids at the time. When I say absentee dad, I mean, like, I just checked out. Like, it's not that I wasn't there or around them, it's just that I did not give them anything about, of who I was. Like, I didn't know how to give it away. I was too embarrassed. I was too embarrassed by the failure. I was too embarrassed by the trauma. I was too embarrassed by the journey. And yes, I knew Christ, but in a lot of ways, it didn't feel like enough. And I felt bad about that, right? How many of us in the room have felt badly about that, right? And if you want to get really honest and deep, how many of us in this room have felt like that's not enough and felt shame because it should be enough? Well, God's big enough to hold that. And I found myself in a vacant home. I bought a house in a community in Nashville. My wife had moved out with her kids, and I was staying in that vacant house. And I found myself in the driveway with a garden hose duct taped to the tailpipe. And the garden, it was a green garden hose, running the driver's side window with towels stuffed in the ground. And I had my hand on the key, and I was about to let it go. That's where I was in 2005. And I was tired of carrying the burden of wanting to be this thing that I didn't feel like I was ever going to be. I was tired of the trauma around reliving my abuse all the time. Anytime a tragedy would come up or something that didn't go my way or some kind of adversity that would happen in my life, it would drum up all this stuff around that and my lack of who I was, my insignificance, just preyed on the shame, and the enemy will use that, guys. You know, the enemy's got a lot of weapons, but guess what? So do we. And so go to Ephesians and learn about the armor of God when you go home today. Because whether I knew it or not, in that moment, in that car with my hand on the ignition, God stepped in the gap. And he said, R.A., he said, don't, like, I can think of maybe 3 times I feel like I've heard the Holy Spirit audibly in my subconscious or my mind, or even out loud through another person. But in this moment was one of them. And I was about to turn the key, and I mean, like, the engine was almost ready to click over, and I felt like a shock of pain inside myself, and I heard the words, I've got something else. That's all I heard. Wasn't anything ridiculously profound. It was just, I've got something else. I just kept hearing it. So I sat in that car for what seemed like 2 hours. It's probably 20 minutes, thinking about that and not turning the key. That's how much God loved me in that moment. To meet me in a place that was so dark and so ugly and so evil and so awful that I was willing to take my own life. So I got out of the car, I went inside that vacant house, I laid on the couch, and the next day, the pastor of the church that I go to stopped by. And that began the rest of my journey to this point as a believer. I decided that I was through telling lies. I was 32 years old. I still not told, like I said, I'd made a wreck of my marriage, and I still hadn't told my wife the truth. I'd lied to her, and when I say I tricked her into marrying me, I wasn't joking. Like, I tricked her. I didn't tell her about my past and all the toxicity that came with that, all the trauma, all the baggage. She had no idea, because I was really good at what? Developing the skills to survive. So I could make you believe anything I wanted about who I was. That's how good I was at it. I was a pro. And I was so much of a pro that I deceived my wife to the core. And with my pastor's help, I started walking with him every day and starting to understand a little bit about the gospel, a little bit more about the gospel, the depth of the gospel. And then I got in with a guy who changed my life. His name was Stephen James. If you pick up my book, I'll read all about him. And he helped me understand a lot of things about not only who I was as a Christian and a human being, but who I could be as an athlete. And as I was doing all this work on myself as a human being and trying to to redeem my marriage, or letting God redeem my marriage. So a pillar of that was inviting my wife into counseling for the first time ever. After I had worked through some of my abuse with a counselor and trying to get to the bottom of that, I fully expected her to hear my story and walk away and say, R.A., you lied to me. I knew that there was something off in you, and I knew that, you were damaged. Like, all the worst scenarios were playing out in my mind, but I had to be okay with her inviting her into that space and letting go and letting God do what he was going to do in that moment. Like surrender. Like the rest of my life from that point on became about, how do I surrender? How do I surrender? That's the journey. So I invited her in. I told her about my abuse. I told her about everything that I knew that was wicked and awful, fully expecting her to leave. And my life changed in that moment when I saw in her eyes and heard in her voice that she wasn't going anywhere. And despite all that, she loves me. And it was a reflection of Jesus I saw in that moment in her. And it's something that motivates me daily to try to live well. And like I said, that was a pillar for me. That was one of those foundational stones of getting to invite somebody into a space that I thought would see me as broken and gross. And instead, I got embraced, and I saw Jesus at work in her, in my life, and it was incredibly impactful. So from that moment on, I started to do a lot of work around my marriage and about how I could become a better man, as a better Christian, a better father, a better friend, and what that meant scripturally, what that meant biblically. And as that started to happen, these things started to unlock. These things started to unlock in my baseball world. And I could have cared less. And that's the beauty. The beauty is, I could have cared less about the Cy Young when I won the Cy Young. Somebody told me the other day, they said, you were the least known Cy Young award winner that I've ever seen. And I said, thank you, that's good news, right? I want to be that. Like, I could care less about that. And when I started to let go of that idol and to let go of my value as a baseball player or as an all-star or as a big leaguer or as somebody that had a contract, and I started to devote myself, and take this with you, man. I tried to devote myself to just making it a life discipline to live the next 5 minutes well. Let that sink in just for a second. How can you make it a life discipline to live the next 5 minutes well? And do that over and over and over again for 12 hours of the day, whether it's a relationship, whether it's with your living God, whether it's in your peer groups, whether it's in the Legacy Builders program, with your parents. I reconciled with my mom because of that transformation. We have a great relationship now. She's incredible. And when I started doing that and making that a life discipline, and that became how I operated as a pitcher, then everything else just kind of fell in place. I'm not saying that that's everybody's story, but for me, if I threw 100 pitches in a game, my discipline in that was, how can I make each pitch, each 20-second pitch, its own separate commitment? If I did that, I would look back at the end of the game and I'd be satisfied with the result. Whether I gave up 5 runs or no runs, whether I threw a no-hitter or a 10-hitter, didn't matter. If I made that a life discipline, I could go, okay. And the only way I was able to do that was the understanding around, that's not who I am. That was the gift I was given to be able to give away in some regards as a pitcher. But that's not who I am. That's just what I do. That's my vocation, yes. But it's not who I am. And so I scream from the rooftops with my family, with my wife, with anybody who would listen. Like, my value as a human being is not that. But what it is that I am a child of the living God. And to know that peace, to know that understanding like Jeremiah talks about, that not the wise man boast of his wisdom, the rich man boast of his riches, or the strong man boast of his strength, but let him who boast boast in this, that he understands me. Understands me. And as I understood God's grace, what he could do in a broken, crappy, horrible life like mine, like what I thought was mine, the more it transformed me. I'll close with this. There's an incredible art in Japan that is called, I think it's called kintsugi, and it's the art of taking broken pottery that's been broken on the ground and being remade. And the end product is unfathomably more valuable and more precious than the previous unbroken piece of pottery ever was. They've inlay it with gold, and it's just a work of art. You should look it up. That's us. God means to remake us every day. And one of the ways that he does that is as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. So I would encourage all you guys, invite people into your life that love you enough to tell you the truth, that want to go on a journey with you. And I promise you, this is a promise, as human of a promise as it can be, but it's God's promise too. Any story that you have that you think is so ugly that it can't be redeemed is alive now. You will see redemption and restoration in your life, and you will feel peace like you have never felt. Guys, thank you for letting me share time with you. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Well, that was a great episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. As always, don't forget to
Like and subscribe.
Yep, and don't forget to support R.A.Dickey. If you really enjoy that story, you want to get a little bit more of it, he has a book out there. We're going to put a link to that so you can check it out. If you want to read and get more detail, feel free to reach out. He has a website, I believe, as well. So we appreciate any time we can hear a cool testimony like that. And with that said,
Yeah, he's got a cool story. Hard road to the big leagues. Got hurt. I think he was. I don't know if he tells the story. He's missing his ulnar nerve in his.
he does.
Yeah.
He mentions that
Yeah.
in the testimony. It was pretty crazy, yeah. And so all that said, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out our merch, and we'll catch you later.
You're safe.